What if I told you that behind the golden doors and crystal chandeliers of the world's most luxurious department store, something watches from the shadows? Tonight, I'm revealing 10 verified incidents from Harrods in London that will make you question everything you thought you knew about this iconic palace of wealth. These aren't urban legends. These are documented cases that staff members whisper about in the break rooms, that security tries to bury, and that shoppers desperately want to forget. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some employees refuse to work certain floors after dark, and why the store's basement has sections that remain permanently closed to the public. This is the dark side of luxury you were never meant to see. Before we begin, I need to know something. Drop a comment right now telling me, where are you watching this from, which city, which country, and what time is it there? Because what I'm about to share with you, the location and time might matter more than you think. She saw her own death in Harrods mirrors. 3 days before it happened, Margot Bellamy was a perfectly ordinary accountant from Surrey until October 14, 2019. That Tuesday afternoon, she entered Harrods' newly renovated beauty hall on the ground floor, drawn by the gleaming mirrors and the promise of a makeover consultation. The renovation had installed an elaborate system of floor-to-ceiling mirrors that created an infinite reflection effect. Elegant, disorienting, beautiful. Margot approached the channel counter, but something in the mirror caught her attention. Not her reflection, another her. This version of Margot stood 20 feet behind her, but when Margot turned around, there was only empty space and other shoppers browsing lipsticks. When she looked back at the mirror, the other Margot was closer, 10 feet now, and she was soaking wet. Water dripped from her hair, from her clothes, pooling on the marble floor that wasn't actually wet. The reflection's eyes were wide with terror, mouth open in a silent scream. Margot stumbled backward, knocking over a display of perfume bottles. Security cameras captured her panicked exit, recorded her collision with the revolving doors, documented her racing down Brompton Road like demons were chasing her. 3 days later, Margot Bellamy drowned in her bathtub. The coroner ruled it accidental. She'd slipped, hit her head, lost consciousness in 6 inches of water. But her sister found something disturbing when cleaning out Margot's flat. A journal entry dated October 14th, written in shaking handwriting. I saw myself dead in the mirror. I was drowning. I could see my own corpse watching me. It's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. The sister brought this to Harrods management, demanding answers. What had her sister seen? The store's response was immediate and ice-cold: legal letters, non-disclosure agreements, a settlement offer that included a clause never to speak publicly about the incident. The beauty hall's mirror configuration was quietly altered 2 weeks later. Staff members reported that in those 2 weeks, 7 other customers had complained about seeing disturbing reflections, versions of themselves injured, bleeding, aged beyond recognition. One man claimed he saw himself as a corpse in Victorian-era clothing. A teenage girl saw herself elderly and screaming. Maintenance workers who dismantled the original mirror arrangement found something they weren't supposed to find. Behind one of the mirrors, sealed in the wall during renovation, was a small Victorian-era photograph of a woman. The photograph was water-damaged and showed a young woman in servant's clothing. On the back, in faded inky, drowned in the cistern, 1898. May God forgive what was done. The photograph disappeared into Harrods' private archives, locked away with other uncomfortable historical artifacts. Former employees have since revealed that the ground floor was built over the original servant quarters of the Victorian-era building, including a cistern where, according to suppressed records, 3 servants died in suspicious circumstances between 1896 and 1901. The mirrors, they theorized, didn't just reflect the present. They reflected fates, deaths, destinies written in the building's blood-soaked foundations. Margot Bellamy saw her death because she stood precisely where someone else had died over a century ago, in water, in terror, with no one coming to help. Day 15, Harrods doll started moving on its own, and it knew customers' names during the 2017 Christmas season. Harrods unveiled an exclusive collection of handcrafted porcelain dolls on the fourth floor toy department. Each doll cost between £8,000 and £15,000, dressed in miniature haute couture with hand-painted faces and real human hair. They were works of art, designed by a reclusive Austrian doll maker named Christoph Eisenberg, who'd emerged from decades of obscurity to create this limited collection. Only 12 dolls existed worldwide, and Harrods had secured 3 for display. The centerpiece doll was called Vivienne, a Victorian-style creation with unsettling lifelike blue eyes and an emerald silk dress that reportedly contained threads from an actual 1880s ball gown. Store manager Felix Drummond was working late on December 8th when he heard singing coming from the toy department. Children's voices, but the store had been closed for 3 hours. Security footage shows Felix walking through the darkened aisles, flashlight in hand, following the sound. The singing was coming from the doll display, specifically from Vivienne. Her porcelain mouth wasn't moving, but the sound was definitely emanating from her. Felix reached for the doll, and that's when her eyes moved. Not a mechanical movement, not a trick of light. Her painted blue eyes shifted, focused, looked directly at him, and she whispered his name. Felix Drummond, 43 years old, divorced, 2 children you never see. Mother died when you were 12. Felix dropped his flashlight and ran. He resigned the next morning without explanation, breaking a 20-year career at Harrods. Management assumed stress and overwork. They didn't believe the story until other incidents began. A customer named Portia Westbrook was examining Vivienne on December 12th when the doll spoke to her. Other shoppers heard it clearly. Your daughter knows what you did to her hamster, Portia. She knows you flushed it alive. Portia collapsed, screaming. She was escorted out by security, babbling about secrets, about things no one should know. How did a doll know about an incident from Portia's childhood, something she'd never told another soul? 3 more customers reported similar experiences. Each time Vivienne revealed intimate, disturbing secrets, affairs, lies, crimes both minor and severe, a theft 20 years ago, a betrayal of a dying friend. Each revelation was accurate, later confirmed by the traumatized customers. Harrods removed all 3 dolls from display on December 15th. But during the night of December 16th, every security camera on the 4th floor simultaneously malfunctioned. When systems came back online 2 hours later, the locked storage room where the dolls were kept was open. Vivienne was gone. The other 2 dolls had been destroyed. Porcelain heads smashed, bodies torn apart, stuffing pulled out like entrails. Written on the wall in what appeared to be the dolls' stuffing material. Police investigated but found no signs of break-in, no fingerprints, nothing stolen except Vivienne. The case went cold. Then the letters started arriving. Staff members received anonymous notes at their homes, each one revealing something personal, something secret, something they'd never spoken aloud. Every letter ended the same way. Vivienne remembers. A former Harrods archivist came forward with a disturbing theory. Christoph Eisenberg, the doll maker, had lost his daughter Vivienne in 1989 under mysterious circumstances in Austria. She disappeared from a department store during Christmas shopping, never found. Eisenberg had a breakdown and vanished from public life. The dolls, the archivist suggested, weren't just art. They were vessels, created through obsession and grief and something darker than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Whatever Eisenberg had poured into those dolls, it was watching, listening, and collecting secrets. Vivienne the doll was never recovered, but staff members still report hearing children's laughter on the 4th floor after hours, and sometimes, customers trying on expensive jewelry will glimpse a porcelain face watching them from between clothing racks. Blue eyes that track their movement, a small smile that knows everything they're desperate to hide. Harrods only has 7 floors, so why did the elevator keep opening on the 13th? Harrods officially operates across 7 floors, from lower ground to 5th floor, with clearly marked directories and impeccable navigation. So when maintenance technician Liam Kavanagh entered elevator number 3 on March 22, 2021, and watched the button panel light up for a 13th floor, he assumed electrical malfunction. The elevator ascended past the 5th floor, past where the building should end, rising in darkness beyond the shaft's normal parameters. When the doors opened, Liam stood at the threshold of a floor that shouldn't exist. The space before him was vast, poorly lit by flickering fluorescent tubes, filled with mannequins, hundreds of them. Not the sleek, modern display mannequins used throughout Harrods, but old ones, vintage damaged, some dating back decades. They stood in clusters, facing random directions, their blank faces somehow conveying an impression of awareness. The floor was dusty, clearly abandoned for years, but Liam could hear sounds. Whispers, footsteps, the rustling of fabric. He stepped back into the elevator and repeatedly pressed the ground floor button. Nothing happened. The elevator doors remained open, almost inviting, almost insistent. Then the mannequins began to turn. Not all at once, one at a time, slowly rotating their heads, their bodies, until every single one was facing him. Liam scrambled at the button panel, finally prying open the emergency phone compartment and triggering the alarm. The elevator doors slammed shut. The car plummeted downward, and when it jerked to a halt at the ground floor, Liam burst out screaming. Security reviewed the elevator logs. According to the digital records, elevator 3 had never moved. Liam had entered at 11:04 p.m. and exited at 11:48 p.m. 1 minute. Impossible. The experience had lasted at least 20 minutes from his perspective. A structural survey was ordered. Engineers examined every inch of the building above the 5th floor. Storage, mechanical rooms, the roof. There was no 13th floor. The building's construction didn't allow for one. No space existed where Liam described going. Yet over the following weeks, 3 other employees reported similar experiences with elevator 3. Each time late at night, each time ascending to a floor that didn't exist, finding that same space filled with mannequins, feeling that same sense of being watched by empty faces. Harrods management sealed elevator 3 from service, citing mechanical issues, but the incidents spread elevator 5, elevator 1, even the escalators. Employees reported seeing an additional level appearing between floors, a glimpse of that mannequin graveyard visible for just seconds before normal floors resumed. A retired Harrods employee named Gerald Fitch contacted current management with an explanation no one wanted to hear. In 1967, during renovations, a storage floor had been built specifically for damaged and obsolete mannequins, a holding area before they could be disposed of. But something had gone wrong. 3 workers disappeared during that renovation period. They'd been working late, installing the new storage level, and simply vanished. Police searched, families grieved. No bodies were ever found. The renovation was completed anyway, but the storage floor was sealed and forgotten, written out of building plans, removed from elevators, erased from official records. Gerald claimed it was still there, caught between floors, existing in some architectural blind spot where the building's history and its present couldn't quite align. The mannequins remembered the workers who vanished, absorbed their presence somehow, and now the floor appeared to those who worked late and alone, perhaps looking for more people to keep those mannequins company. Harrods dismissed Gerald's account as the confused memories of an elderly man, but elevator 3 remains out of service. Engineers who tried to repair it reported hearing voices in the shaft, whispers echoing up from impossible depths, and one technician swore he saw a mannequin hand reaching from between floors, plastic fingers grasping, pulling itself toward his light. The elevator doors were welded shut. The shaft was filled with concrete. But late shift employees still hear the ping of elevator 3 arriving at floors, doors opening to emptiness, and sometimes they smell dust and old plastic and something deeper. The scent of fear that never quite fades from a place where people vanished into walls and never came home. De Harrods' exclusive perfume made women remember dying in 1952, but they weren't born yet in September 2018. Harrods launched an exclusive fragrance created by a boutique perfume house in Grasse, France. The scent was called M.A. Moyer Perdue. Lost memory. Only 200 bottles existed, each priced at the $8.50, packaged in Art Deco crystal bottles that evoked old Hollywood glamour. The fragrance notes included white lily, rain-soaked earth, and something the creators mysteriously called temporal accord. Within 3 weeks, 47 women who'd purchased M.A. Moyer Perdue contacted Harrods with identical complaints. The perfume triggered memories that weren't theirs. Not vague impressions or dreamlike sequences, but detailed, visceral memories of living and dying in 1952 London. One woman, Natasha Clement, aged 34, suddenly remembered being Eleanor Marsh, a 26-year-old secretary who died in the Great Smog of December 1952. Natasha could describe Eleanor's flat on Cheapside, remember the names of colleagues, recall the suffocating feeling of walking through poisonous fog, lungs burning, collapsing in the street, dying slowly while strangers stepped over her body. These weren't fantasies. Natasha hired a researcher who confirmed Eleanor Marsh existed. Death certificate dated December 7, 1952. Cause of death, respiratory failure due to smog exposure. Every detail Natasha remembered matched historical records, including details never published publicly. 46 other women reported similar experiences. Each remembered dying in London in 1952, different names, different circumstances. Some from the Great Smog, others from accidents, illnesses, one from murder. But all that specific year, all that specific city, and these weren't past life memories in any spiritual sense. These women didn't believe they were reincarnations. They were terrified because they were living two memories simultaneously, their actual lives in 2018, and these intrusive, impossibly detailed memories of lives they'd never lived, deaths they'd never died. Harrods immediately recalled M.A. Moyer Perdue, offering full refunds and counseling services. The fragrance house in Grasse denied responsibility, claiming their formula contained nothing unusual, nothing that could possibly cause psychological effects. But an investigation into the perfume's creation revealed something disturbing. The perfumer, an elderly man named Auguste Pelletier, had used a collection of vintage essences in creating the temporal accord, oils and extracts preserved from 1952. He'd purchased these from an estate sale in London, the belongings of a woman who'd been a perfume hobbyist. That woman was Eleanor Marsh. Her collection of essences, carefully preserved in her flat for 66 years, had been incorporated into M.A. Moyer Perdue. Somehow, those essences carried more than scent. They carried memory itself, preserved at a molecular level, and when inhaled, they triggered something in the brain, a kind of olfactory imprinting that overwrote present memory with past experience. Science couldn't explain it. Neurologists examined the affected women and found unusual activity in their hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory formation, but no physical damage, no chemical explanation. The women's memories of 1952 faded slowly over months, but never completely. They all reported feeling haunted, carrying within them the final moments of women who died decades before they were born. Natasha Clement began visiting Eleanor Marsh's grave, leaving flowers, feeling an inexplicable grief for a woman she'd never met but whose death she could remember with perfect, terrible clarity. Harrods destroyed the remaining bottles of M.A. Moyer Perdue, or so they claimed. But collectors whisper about bottles that survived, selling on private markets for tens of thousands of pounds to those who want to experience the impossible, to remember lives they never lived, to die deaths that weren't theirs. Auguste Pelletier disappeared shortly after the scandal. His workshop in Grasse was found abandoned, but on his workbench was a new formula he'd been developing labeled M.A. Moyer Éternel, Eternal Memory. The ingredients list included essences dated 1889, 1923, 1945, different deaths, different memories waiting to be inhaled to overwrite the present with the inescapable past. The French authorities seized his materials, but they never found Auguste. Some say he fled to avoid legal consequences. Others believe he tested his own creations and got lost somewhere in the centuries of memories he'd been collecting. His own identity drowned in 1,000 lives that weren't his, unable to remember which death was actually his own. A dead child rides Harrods' Egyptian escalator every night at 20:47 a.m. Staff know not to look. The Egyptian escalator is one of Harrods' most photographed features, an elaborate Art Deco creation adorned with Sphinx statues, hieroglyphics, and ornate details that create an exotic fantasy as customers ascend between floors. During the day, it's crowded and elegant. At night, when the store closes, it becomes something else entirely. Security guard Amani Okafor learned the unwritten rule on her third night shift in November 2020. Never look directly at the Egyptian escalator after 20:45 a.m. The senior guards had mentioned it casually during training, treating it like a joke, but their eyes were serious. Imani laughed it off. At 2:47 a.m. precisely, she was conducting her rounds when she heard crying. A child's crying, coming from the escalator. Despite every instinct screaming at her not to look, Imani turned. A young boy, perhaps 7 years old, rode the escalator upward. He wore old-fashioned clothing, shorts, knee socks, a collared shirt that looked decades out of date. He was crying, reaching upward toward something Imani couldn't see, his small face twisted in absolute terror. Imani called out to him, asking if he was lost, how he'd gotten into the locked store. The boy didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear her. He continued riding the escalator upward, and as he reached the top, he vanished. Not faded, not walked away. Vanished mid-step like a television switching off. Imani ran to the upper floor, nothing. No boy, no footsteps. She radioed the other guards, demanding to know if they'd seen a child in the store. The silence on the radio was heavy before the senior guard, Marcus, responded. You looked, didn't you? You weren't supposed to look. Marcus met her in the break room and explained. The boy appears every night at exactly 2:47 a.m. He's been appearing for over 30 years, as far as anyone can verify. He rides the escalator upward, crying, reaching for something, and then he disappears. No one knows who he is. No one knows why. But anyone who looks at him directly experiences something afterward. Dreams of falling, of being crushed, of metal and machinery closing in. Some guards who've looked have quit within days, unable to shake the nightmares. One guard was found screaming in a bathroom stall at 3 a.m., tearing at his own skin, claiming he could feel gears grinding inside his body. Imani wanted to dismiss it as hazing, as a ghost story the guards told to scare newcomers. But that night, she dreamed. She was small again, a child, trapped in machinery, feeling metal teeth pulling her downward, grinding, crushing, while people walked past and pretended not to see. The dreams continued every night, escalating in intensity. Desperate, Imani began researching. Historical records of Harrods revealed a tragedy in May 1988. A 7-year-old boy named Timothy Ashford had been shopping with his mother when his shoelace caught in the escalator mechanism. Before anyone could react, the escalator had pulled his foot into the machinery. Emergency stop buttons were pressed, but not in time. Timothy's leg was severely injured. He died in hospital 3 days later from complications. The escalator where it happened had been replaced during renovations, replaced with the Egyptian escalator. Same location, same machinery, essentially. Different aesthetic. But Timothy was still riding that escalator, still reaching upward for his mother's hand, still trapped in the moment before everything went wrong. Imani tried to help. She contacted mediums, paranormal investigators, anyone who might know how to release a trapped spirit. Most were frauds, but one elderly woman, a former Harrods employee from the 1980s, came forward. Her name was Gladys Penworth, and she'd been working the floor when Timothy's accident occurred. Gladys had been the one who pressed the emergency stop button. Too late. She'd carried the guilt for 32 years. She returned to Harrods one night with Imani present and stood at the escalator at 20:47 a.m. When Timothy appeared, crying and reaching, Gladys spoke to him, told him it wasn't his fault, told him his mother forgave him for running ahead, told him he could stop reaching now. For one moment, Timothy looked directly at Gladys. He stopped crying, he stopped reaching, and he smiled, a small, relieved smile. Then he faded, not vanishing abruptly but dissolving like morning mist, gently and completely. The Egyptian escalator has been silent since that night. No more crying at 2:47 a.m. No more small boy reaching for help that came too late. But Imani still avoids looking directly at the escalator during night shifts, because once, just once, she thought she saw small handprints on the brass railing, pressed into metal as if the brass were soft as clay, the desperate grip of a child who'd held on as tight as he could and lost anyway. Harrods sold a mannequin that appeared in buyers' houses even after they returned it in March 2016. Harrods held an exclusive sale of vintage display mannequins during a renovation of the women's fashion department. These weren't modern mannequins but genuine vintage pieces from the 1950s through 1980s, once used in the store's most prestigious displays. Each was priced between $300 and $200, marketed as collector's items and unique home decor. Veronica Ashworth, an interior designer from Notting Hill, purchased a 1960s female mannequin for $6 to $50. The mannequin was elegant, with a serene expression and articulated wooden arms that could be posed. Veronica named her Claudette and planned to use her in a client's vintage-themed boutique hotel. The first night after the purchase, Veronica woke at 3 a.m. to sounds in her house. Footsteps, slow, measured, clicking footsteps like heels on hardwood floors. She crept from her bedroom and saw Claudette standing at the end of the hallway. Veronica was certain she'd left the mannequin in the living room, positioned near the window. Now Claudette was here, 30 feet away, turned to face the bedroom, her wooden arms repositioned with one hand raised, finger pointing directly at Veronica. Veronica convinced herself she'd misremembered where she'd placed the mannequin. Stress, long work hours, imagination. The next morning, she found Claudette in the kitchen, standing at the counter. With a knife from the knife block in her wooden hand, Veronica immediately returned Claudette to Harrods, demanding a refund and nearly hysterical with fear. The store accepted the return without question, with almost practiced efficiency, as if they'd dealt with similar complaints before. They refunded her money, apologized, and assured her the mannequin would be disposed of. That night at 3 a.m., Veronica woke to footsteps again. Claudette was standing at the foot of her bed. Veronica fled her house in her nightclothes, staying with a friend. When she returned the next day with 2 friends as support, Claudette was gone. No sign of forced entry. No explanation for how a returned mannequin had gotten back into her locked home. Veronica contacted Harrods threatening legal action. The store sent representatives, not lawyers but 2 men who seemed more like handlers than legal counsel. They asked careful questions. Had Veronica touched the mannequin extensively? Had she moved it herself or hired movers? How many times had she looked directly at its face? The questions seemed bizarre, invasive, wrong. The men left with vague assurances. That night, 3 a.m., Claudette returned. This time standing in Veronica's bathroom, visible in the shower through the translucent curtain, absolutely motionless. Veronica broke. She called the police, who found nothing. She called paranormal investigators, who detected unusual electromagnetic readings, but offered no solutions. She finally connected with other buyers from that Harrods mannequin sale through online forums. 7 other people reported identical experiences. Mannequins returning after being sold, appearing in homes, moving through locked doors, positioning themselves in increasingly disturbing locations. Bedrooms, bathrooms, children's nurseries. One man in Cardiff found his purchased mannequin sitting at his kitchen table with a place setting arranged before it. Another woman in Edinburgh woke to find hers standing over her sleeping children. Every buyer had returned the mannequin to Harrods. Every mannequin had come back. A former Harrods warehouse worker came forward anonymously. The vintage mannequins from that sale hadn't been used exclusively for display purposes. In the 1970s and early 1980s, before modern security systems, Harrods had a significant problem with after-hours theft, employees stealing merchandise, occasionally breaking into the store after closing. Several employees disappeared under suspicious circumstances during this period. Internal investigations went nowhere, but the disappearances stopped after the mannequins began appearing throughout the store, positioned as if watching, as if aware. The mannequins, the worker claimed, weren't just display pieces. They were markers placed over spots where something terrible had happened, where people had vanished, where the store's security had dealt with problems in ways that were never officially documented. The mannequins had absorbed something from those events, held some remnant of violence and disappearance, and when they were sold, they brought that darkness with them. They didn't like being moved. They didn't like new homes. They wanted to stay in Harrods, where they belonged, where they had purpose. Veronica's story ends without resolution. Claudette never stopped appearing. Eventually, Veronica abandoned her home, unable to sleep, unable to exist in spaces where she might turn a corner and find that serene wooden face watching her. Other buyers report the same. The mannequins return, again and again, impossible to escape, and Harrods. They stopped selling vintage mannequins. The remaining pieces from that era are locked in deep storage, in rooms that employees avoid, where the lights flicker and shadows seem to move with purpose. Sometimes night security hears clicking footsteps echoing through sealed storage areas, the sound of wooden feet on concrete floors, mannequins walking in darkness, waiting patiently to be brought back upstairs, back to the floors they guard, back to the places where people disappeared and no one asked too many questions. Security footage shows a woman shopping in Harrods every night for 6 years, but she died in 2016. Harrods security analyst Derek Howland noticed the pattern in February 2022 while reviewing overnight footage for unrelated incident reports. A woman appeared in multiple camera feeds, shopping casually through the store, examining merchandise, moving from department to department. This wasn't unusual during business hours, but Derek was watching footage from 3:30 a.m. when the store was locked and empty. He checked previous nights. She was there. He went back weeks. She appeared regularly, 2 to 3 times per week, always between 3 a.m. and 4:05 a.m., always alone, shopping as if the store were open. Derek pulled footage going back months, then years. The woman appeared consistently, never aging, wearing the same outfit in every appearance. A burgundy dress, pearl necklace, practical heels. 6 years of footage, hundreds of appearances. The same woman, who shouldn't exist in a locked building, shopping through empty aisles. Derek brought this to his supervisor, expecting technical explanations, looped footage, camera malfunctions, digital artifacts. Instead, his supervisor went pale and immediately escalated to upper management. Within hours, Derek was in a meeting with security directors and legal counsel. They knew about her. They'd known for years. Her name was Beatrice Hollowell, and she'd died in Harrods on November 18, 2016. Heart attack in the shoe department. Collapsed while trying on Louboutins. Staff had responded immediately. Paramedics called, but Beatrice was dead before the ambulance arrived. Her family held a funeral. She was cremated. Yet 2 weeks after her death, she appeared on overnight security footage, shopping in the exact department where she died. For 6 years, management had monitored her appearances, kept records, tried to understand. They'd brought in experts, paranormal investigators, physicists, psychologists. No one could explain how a dead woman appeared on digital cameras in a locked building. She wasn't a visual anomaly. Cameras captured her from multiple angles simultaneously. Motion sensors detected her presence. One brave security guard had even tried to approach her during one appearance, guided by camera operators watching live feeds. As he got within 10 feet, his radio failed, his flashlight died, and he was overcome by crushing chest pain, exactly like a heart attack. He survived, but barely. No one approached her after that. Beatrice continued her nightly shopping, undisturbed and undisturbing. A ghost who didn't realize she was dead, who returned night after night to the place where she died, continuing an interrupted shopping trip for eternity. Derek became obsessed with Beatrice's case. He reviewed every second of footage, documenting her patterns. She always visited the same departments: shoes, handbags, jewelry, perfume. She would examine items carefully, sometimes appearing to speak to salespeople who weren't there, occasionally seeming frustrated when she couldn't complete purchases. Her routine never varied significantly. She was trapped in a loop, endlessly shopping, endlessly browsing, unable to finish, unable to leave. Derek located Beatrice's daughter, Catherine, and against strict company orders, arranged a meeting. He showed her the footage. Catherine wept. She'd known her mother was obsessed with Harrods, had shopped there almost compulsively, had found joy in the luxury and elegance that had been absent from her difficult life. Harrods had been Beatrice's escape, her fantasy world. She was supposed to meet me that day, Catherine explained. November 18th. We were going to have tea after she finished shopping. I was running late. I never made it. She died alone. Derek proposed something unprecedented. He arranged for Catherine to be in the store during one of Beatrice's appearances. At 3:30 a.m. on March 15, 2022, Catherine stood in the shoe department while Derek and a skeleton security crew monitored from the control room. Beatrice appeared at 3:37 a.m., manifesting on camera as she always did, walking from the escalator, heading toward the designer heels. Catherine spoke to her mother's ghost. The cameras captured Catherine speaking, crying, apologizing for being late, telling Beatrice she could stop shopping now. It was time to go, time to rest. For the first time in 6 years, Beatrice's pattern changed. She stopped walking. She turned, appearing to see Catherine, appearing to recognize her daughter. She smiled, a small, relieved smile. She set down the shoe she'd been holding, mouthed something the cameras couldn't capture, and faded from view. Beatrice Hollowell never appeared on Harrods security footage again. Derek was terminated 3 days later for violating company protocol by involving a civilian in a security matter. But he doesn't regret it. He kept copies of the footage, evidence of a woman who loved shopping so much that death couldn't stop her, who wandered Harrods aisles for 6 years until her daughter finally showed up for their appointment. 6 years late, but not too late to say goodbye. The shoe department is quieter now. Staff report that the area feels lighter, less oppressive, but occasionally, usually on November 18th, employees find a single shoe moved from its display, placed carefully in the center of the aisle, as if someone had tried it on one last time, decided it was perfect, and finally finished shopping. Harrods' famous food hall served dishes that wouldn't be prepared until tomorrow. Time was moving backwards in August 2020. During the height of pandemic restrictions, Harrods' legendary food halls were operating with reduced capacity and enhanced safety protocols. Executive chef Marcus Talbot was overseeing the prepared food section when he noticed something impossible. A customer complaint had come in about a salmon dish causing food poisoning. The complaint was detailed. The customer, Raina Desai, described becoming ill after eating a particular preparation of Scottish salmon with dill sauce, purchased from the seafood counter on August 14th at approximately 2 p.m. She provided a receipt and photographs of the dish. The problem was simple and terrifying. Marcus was reading this complaint on August 13th. The meal Raina described hadn't been prepared yet. It wouldn't be prepared until tomorrow, according to the kitchen schedule. The salmon she'd photographed, the specific presentation, the dill sauce variation, all of it was planned for the next day's menu, not today's. Marcus checked Raina's receipt. It was dated August 14th, 2022, 17 p.m. Official Harrods receipt, authentic in every detail, for a transaction that wouldn't occur for another 26 hours. He tried to contact Raina using the customer information from the complaint. The phone number didn't connect. The email bounced back. She didn't exist yet, or existed in a time that hadn't happened. Marcus dismissed it as an administrative error, a computer glitch, a prank. The next day, August 14th, he watched the seafood counter carefully at 20:15 p.m. A woman matching Raina's description approached the counter and ordered the Scottish salmon with dill sauce. Marcus stopped her before she could take a bite. He explained there might be contamination, offered a replacement meal. Raina was confused but accepted. 2 days later, Marcus received a thank you email from Raina. She'd heard that several people who'd eaten the salmon that day continue eat it, had become seriously ill with food poisoning from improper storage. She was grateful Marcus had warned her, possibly saving her from hospitalization. But Marcus hadn't warned her because of improper storage. He'd warned her because he'd received a complaint from the future. The incidents accelerated. On August 20th, Marcus found a refund request for a truffle pasta dish dated August 23rd. On August 22nd, he received a glowing review for a dessert that wouldn't be created until August 25th. On August 24th, a customer approached him furiously demanding to speak to management about a disastrous afternoon tea service. She described specific details: broken china, spilled champagne, a waiter named James who'd been incredibly rude. Marcus checked the schedule. That afternoon tea service was planned for August 27th. The waiter James wasn't even scheduled to work until then. Marcus tried to warn management, but explaining the situation made him sound delusional. Future complaints about meals that hadn't been served yet. Time-stamped receipts from days that hadn't occurred. He sounded like he was having a breakdown. Then August 27th arrived, and the afternoon tea service went exactly as the customer had described 3 days earlier. China broke, champagne spilled. James, dealing with personal stress, was short with customers. Every detail matched. Marcus realized he wasn't receiving messages from the future. Time in the food hall was folding back on itself, creating loops where effects preceded causes, where outcomes existed before actions, where tomorrow bled into yesterday. He began documenting everything. Receipts dated in the future, complaints describing incidents that hadn't happened, reviews for meals not yet prepared. He traced the phenomenon to a specific location in the food hall, the original Victorian-era cold storage room that had been preserved as a historical feature during renovations. The room was sealed now, visible through glass as a museum piece, but it had once been the heart of Harrods' food operations in the 1890s. Historical research revealed something disturbing. In January 1897, a fire in the cold storage had killed 3 workers. The official cause was a lantern accident, but suppressed reports suggested something stranger. Witnesses claimed Time had behaved strangely during the fire. Some workers swore they'd seen the flames before they started, had smelled smoke hours before the lantern fell, had heard screams before anyone was injured. The investigation was buried. The room was rebuilt, but perhaps Time had been damaged there, fractured in some fundamental way, and that fracture was spreading, turning the food hall into a place where past, present, and future existed simultaneously. Marcus conducted an experiment. He prepared a specific dish, a lemon tart with edible flowers, and documented everything about its creation on August 29th. Then he searched through accumulated paperwork for any mention of this dish. He found a customer review dated August 26th, 3 days before he'd made it, praising the exceptional lemon tart with edible flowers, purchased from Harrods Food Hall. The review was detailed, accurate, describing a dish that hadn't existed when it was written. Time wasn't just folding. It was collapsing entirely in that space. Past and future were becoming indistinguishable. Marcus stood in the food hall at midnight alone and watched as the sealed Victorian cold storage room flickered. Through the glass, he saw it both as it was, empty, preserved, a museum piece, and as it had been, workers moving, carrying ice blocks, lanterns glowing, and flames rising. The moment of the 1897 fire happening simultaneously with the present. The workers were screaming, but Marcus could also hear customers from the future shopping, ordering meals that wouldn't exist for years, time layering upon itself in an impossible cacophony. He reported everything to upper management with all his documentation. Harrods quietly closed that section of the food hall for renovations in September 2020. The Victorian cold storage room was sealed behind additional barriers. The area was blessed by religious officials from multiple faiths: Christian priests, Muslim imams, Hindu pundits, Jewish rabbis, all performing rituals to contain whatever temporal damage existed in that space. The food hall reopened 3 months later, but the Victorian cold storage is no longer visible to the public. It's been walled off completely, buried behind modern refrigeration units. Marcus Talbot no longer works at Harrods. He left the company in 2021, unable to shake the experience of seeing time collapse, of knowing that in some fundamental way, the past never actually ended in that building. It's still happening, always happening. The 1897 fire still burning, the workers still dying, their screams echoing forward through decades. Before he left, Marcus received one final message, an email dated September 15, 2023, 3 years in the future at the time he read it. It was from himself. Don't go back, the email read. Whatever they offer, whatever they promise, don't return to Harrods. The cold storage is spreading. By the time you read this in 2023, it will have consumed the entire food hall. Time doesn't work there anymore. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, all the same moment, all happening at once. I went back to fix it, and I can't leave. I'm trapped in every day simultaneously, cooking meals for customers who died a century ago and haven't been born yet. Don't make my mistake. Stay away. Marcus deleted the email and never spoke of it publicly. But former colleagues report that he still receives those emails periodically. Messages from his future self, each one more desperate, more fragmented, describing an existence trapped in temporal loops, cooking forever in a Harrods that exists outside of linear time. And sometimes, late-night visitors to the food hall report seeing a man who looks like Marcus Talbot working behind the counters, preparing elaborate dishes with mechanical precision, never speaking, never stopping, his eyes empty and distant, as if he's seeing everything that ever happened and ever will happen in that space all at once, trapped in the eternal moment where time broke and never quite healed. A Harrods personal shopper started predicting customer deaths. Then customers started dying exactly as she described. Eloise Pemberton was Harrods' most successful personal shopper, with a client list that included celebrities, royalty, and billionaires. Her talent was uncanny. She seemed to know exactly what clients wanted before they articulated it, anticipating needs, understanding desires they hadn't expressed. Her clients adored her. Management valued her. She generated millions in revenue annually. Then in April 2019, something in Eloise changed. Her colleague, Nina Blackwood, noticed it first during a routine client consultation. Eloise was helping a wealthy banker's wife select jewelry when she suddenly went pale, staring at the woman with an expression of absolute horror. "You shouldn't buy that necklace," Eloise whispered. "You won't have time to wear it." The client was offended. Nina smoothed over the interaction, and the client left with her purchase, a $40,000 diamond necklace. 6 days later, the client died in a car accident on the M4. Nina confronted Eloise, who seemed devastated but not surprised. "I saw it," Eloise explained. "When I touched her hand during the consultation, I saw the accident. The truck, the rain, the way her car flipped. I saw her dying, and I knew the necklace would be in her bag, unworn, never worn, pointless." Nina assumed stress, recommended Eloise take time off. But the incidents continued. A businessman selecting suits. Eloise suddenly refused to help him, backing away, whispering about drowning, about water filling lungs. 2 weeks later, he drowned while swimming during a Greek holiday. A young woman shopping for a wedding trousseau. Eloise broke down crying, talking about fire, about burned skin, about screaming. The woman's apartment caught fire 3 months later. She survived, but barely, with the burns Eloise had described. Clients started avoiding Eloise, unnerved by her intensity, her strange warnings. Management moved her to back of house roles, away from customer contact. But Eloise couldn't stop the visions. She'd touch merchandise and see the deaths of whoever would eventually purchase it. A handbag, its future owner would die of an aneurysm in October. A watch, the buyer would be murdered by their business partner. A scarf, suicide, pills, bathtub, January. Nina stayed close to Eloise, trying to understand. "It started after the renovation," Eloise explained. "They remodeled the VIP consultation rooms in March. I was the first person to use the new space. There's something wrong with it. The mirrors, maybe, or something in the walls. Since then, I touch people or things they'll own, and I see their deaths. Every time, I can't stop seeing them dying." Nina investigated the renovation. The VIP consultation rooms had been redesigned with reclaimed materials. Vintage mirrors salvaged from an estate sale. Antique fixtures from a demolished hotel, wood paneling from a 1920s ocean liner being scrapped. Beautiful materials with history. But what history? The mirrors came from the estate of Gerald Thorne, a Victorian-era occultist who died in 1904 under mysterious circumstances. Thorne had been obsessed with death divination, with seeing futures, with predicting when people would die. His mirrors were reportedly part of his rituals, tools he'd used in attempts to peer beyond the veil. The hotel fixtures came from the Greystone Hotel, demolished after a series of suicides in the 1970s. The ocean liner paneling came from the RMS Carpathia, the ship that had rescued Titanic survivors, which had later sunk itself with significant loss of life in 1918. Every material in that room carried death, and Eloise, sensitive in ways she didn't understand, had absorbed that energy, become a conduit for the room's morbid purpose. She now did exactly what Gerald Thorne's mirrors were designed to do: show death before it arrived. Eloise tried to use her visions to save people. She'd send anonymous warnings to clients, messages advising them to avoid specific places on specific dates, to cancel trips, to seek medical checkups. Some listened. A few deaths were prevented, but most people ignored warnings from an unknown source, dismissing them as pranks or scams, and Eloise had to live with knowing she'd seen their deaths and been powerless to stop them. By October 2019, Eloise was barely functional. She'd seen hundreds of deaths by then, an overwhelming flood of mortality that she carried constantly. She couldn't touch anyone without seeing how they'd die, couldn't hold merchandise without visions of future owners' demises. She was drowning in death, surrounded by it constantly, unable to escape. On October 31st, 2019, Eloise entered the VIP consultation room alone after hours. Security footage shows her positioning herself in front of Gerald Thorne's mirror, sitting in the chair where she'd consulted with so many clients, staring at her own reflection. She remained motionless for 47 minutes. Then she stood, calmly left the room, left Harrods, and walked to Tower Bridge. She climbed over the railing and jumped into the Thames. Her body was recovered 2 days later. The note in her apartment explained everything. I finally saw my own death. It was the only way to stop seeing everyone else's. I'm sorry I couldn't save them all. Tell Nina that the room needs to be destroyed, not just closed. The mirrors remember everything, and they're still watching, still showing futures that shouldn't be seen. Destroy it before someone else ends up like me. Harrods ignored the note. The VIP consultation rooms remained, the mirrors still in place. They assigned new personal shoppers to the space. Within 6 months, 2 more personal shoppers requested transfers, reporting disturbing visions and dreams. Both described seeing clients' deaths. One attempted suicide but survived. Harrods finally sealed the room in August 2020, citing design inadequacies. But Nina Blackwood, who'd left the company by then, knew the truth. The mirrors were still there, still watching, still showing deaths to anyone sensitive enough to see. And sometimes, late-night security guards report seeing a woman in the sealed VIP room, visible through the frosted glass doors. She's sitting in the consultation chair, staring into mirrors that no longer officially exist, watching death after death after death, unable to look away, trapped forever in the moment. Before she decided the only death she could control was her own. Eloise Pemberton's family sued Harrods for negligence and wrongful death. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum with strict non-disclosure agreements. But Nina kept everything. Eloise's notes, the list of clients who died exactly as Eloise predicted, the research about the mirrors. She published it all anonymously online, warning anyone who might work or shop in that cursed space. The VIP consultation room remains sealed. Harrods lists it as undergoing renovation, indefinitely. But the mirrors are still there, and death doesn't need an audience to continue its work. It just needs someone foolish enough to look into Gerald Thorne's glass and ask to see what's coming, forgetting that some futures are merciful precisely because we cannot see them, and that knowledge of death's approach doesn't grant power over it. Only the terrible burden of watching it arrive on schedule, inevitable as the ticking of a clock that can't be stopped. Harrods has 3 basement levels on the maps. Maintenance workers have found 17, and counting. Thomas Greer worked Harrods maintenance for 23 years before he discovered the impossible stairs. In June 2021, he was investigating a water leak in the 3rd basement level, the lowest official floor, housing utilities, storage, and building systems. Following the sound of dripping water, Thomas found a service corridor he'd never noticed before. Despite decades of familiarity with the basement's layout, the corridor ended at a metal door marked with faded paint, "Lower services, authorized personnel only." The lock was old, corroded, but it opened easily. Beyond it, stairs descended into darkness. Thomas followed them down, expecting another sublevel, perhaps an old coal storage from the building's Victorian origins. He descended 1 flight, 2 flights, 3 flights. The stairs continued downward. His radio crackled with static, then died. His phone had no signal. The air grew colder with each descending step, carrying a smell of damp stone and something older, something that reminded Thomas of churches and tombs. After 7 flights, 7 full stories deep, far below where any basement should exist beneath London, Thomas reached another door. This one was wooden, ancient, with an inscription carved directly into the wood in Latin. Thomas didn't read Latin, but he photographed it with his phone before the battery died. Beyond the door, another corridor stretched into darkness, lined with what appeared to be Victorian-era gas lamps, long extinguished. And at the end of this corridor, more stairs descending. Thomas climbed back up, spooked by the depth, by the impossibility of what he'd found. He reported it to his supervisor, who dismissed it as a misunderstanding. Perhaps Thomas had gotten turned around in the sub-basements, which were admittedly labyrinthine and confusing. But Thomas was certain. He returned the next day with a colleague, bringing flashlights, rope, chalk to mark their path. They descended together, 7 flights, through the wooden door, down the Victorian corridor, and then down more stairs. This set descended even further, opening into what appeared to be medieval stonework. Walls made of massive limestone blocks, the kind used in construction centuries before Harrods existed. They descended 12 flights total before Thomas's colleague, Patrick, refused to go further. The air was too cold, the darkness too complete, and they'd both heard something, footsteps echoing from below, climbing upward toward them, though when they shined lights downward, the stairs were empty. They marked their lowest point with chalk and climbed back up. 14 flights. They descended 14 full stories beneath Harrods, beneath London's street level, beneath the underground tunnels, beneath everything that should exist there. When they emerged in the 3rd basement level, they'd been gone for 4 hours, though it had felt like 40 minutes. Maintenance records showed no such stairwell in building blueprints. Harrods' official documentation listed 3 basement levels, total depth of approximately 40 feet below street level. Thomas and Patrick had descended at least 150 feet, possibly more. Management launched an internal investigation, sending a team to explore the stairwell. They descended for an entire day, going far beyond where Thomas and Patrick had stopped. They used radio repeaters, rope guidelines, professional equipment. They descended 23 flights before the lead investigator ordered the team to return. 23 stories beneath Harrods, but at every landing, more stairs continued downward into darkness. The investigation team reported strange findings at various levels. At level 8, rooms filled with Victorian-era merchandise still in boxes, covered in decades of dust. At level 12, what appeared to be living quarters, beds made, tables set for meals that were never eaten, everything preserved as if waiting for occupants who never returned. At level 16, a massive library with thousands of books, but every book was blank. Pages of expensive paper with no text, no images, nothing. At level 20, cells, like a prison, iron doors standing open, chains hanging from walls, and scratch marks on the stone floor, as if something had been dragged. At level 23, a massive door, ornately carved, locked from the inside with mechanisms the team couldn't understand, and beyond it, the sound of machinery running, grinding, pumping. though no power lines extended that deep, management sealed the stairwell with a concrete wall 3 feet thick. Officially, the exploration was declared a structural hazard assessment. Unofficially, everyone who participated signed non-disclosure agreements threatening immediate termination and legal action for any breach. Thomas Greer requested early retirement 3 months later. He still has nightmares about those stairs, about the descending darkness, about the certainty that if he'd kept going, if he'd descended far enough, he'd have found something at the bottom, something that explained why those stairs existed, why rooms were furnished and abandoned, why cells stood empty, why machinery ran in impossible depths beneath London. A former Harrods archivist, speaking anonymously, provided context that the company has never confirmed. Harrods stands on land that's been continuously occupied for over 1,000 years. Medieval structures, Roman ruins beneath those, and beneath Roman London, evidence of older settlements, Celtic, Bronze Age, perhaps older still. The building has been constructed, destroyed, rebuilt countless times, each era built atop the ruins of the previous. The stairs, the archivist theorized, aren't going down into new construction. They're going down through history, through layers of London that existed and vanished, preserved somehow beneath the modern store. Each level represents a different era, a different version of what stood there. And if you descended far enough, you'd eventually reach the very beginning. Whatever stood there first, before London, before civilization, before anyone built anything at all. Thomas doesn't know if that theory is true. He doesn't want to know. But sometimes he dreams about those stairs, and in his dreams, he keeps descending. Past the 23 levels the investigation team reached, down through darkness and cold and centuries. And in his dreams, he finally reaches the bottom. There's a final door there, and it's opening, and something is stepping through. Something that's been waiting beneath Harrods, beneath London, beneath everything, for a very long time. Something that has always been there, in the deepest darkness, and is finally climbing upward. In his dreams, Thomas hears that something's footsteps on the stairs, echoing upward through level after level, getting closer, ascending toward the store above, toward the world that built on top of it, and forgot it was there. He wakes before it reaches the surface, but the footsteps continue, and he wonders if anyone working in Harrods hears them sometimes. Slow footsteps from impossible directions, from below, from depths that shouldn't exist, from something that's been descending those stairs for centuries, and has finally decided to climb back up. These 10 stories are just the beginning. Harrods holds over 170 years of history, and history that old doesn't rest quietly. It watches from mirrors, rides empty escalators, shops through locked doors, and descends stairs that have no bottom. If you've ever worked at Harrods, if you've experienced something unexplainable in that building, share your story in the comments below. You're not alone. Others have seen it too. Others know the truth, that behind the luxury and elegance, something older, something darker, has always been there, watching, waiting. Remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because next week, I'm investigating the abandoned underground station beneath Harrods that even Transport for London pretends doesn't exist. The station where trains still arrive at midnight, carrying passengers who've been dead for 80 years. Until then, the next time you're shopping in Harrods, pay attention. Notice the mannequins that watch too carefully. Listen for footsteps that echo from empty aisles. Look into the mirrors and ask yourself, is that really your reflection, or is it showing you something else? Something that hasn't happened yet, or something that happened a very long time ago and never truly ended. Sweet dreams, and remember, luxury always has a price. Sometimes that price is higher than any of us can afford to pay.